Hello everyone, welcome to the Lonely Raven acrylic painting lesson. My name is Tara Lynn Pugh. I am the Painted Cicada and I am so excited that you are joining me tonight. Fall is one of my absolute favorite seasons, and so with the starting of September, I am super excited to welcome fall in. If you are here tonight, I know you have found this supply list with the video link, and I'm just going to go over supplies really quickly before we get started. I'll be working on a 9x12 canvas, mainly because it fits perfectly on my camera, but you can also work on a 16x20 canvas. As far as acrylic paint goes, these are just suggested colors, but you can change or modify the colors however you would like. As far as the paint brand or type, you can use any acrylic paint that you have or love. I'm using a variety of different kinds. As far as colors, black and white. You will need raw sienna. If you don't have raw sienna, a deep yellow ochre is a nice substitute for that. So we're kind of just going for a yellow brown with the raw sienna. A burnt umber. Cobalt blue is just a nice bright blue. Deep yellow. That when it says deep yellow, it just means, you know, not a pastel yellow. You want a nice bright yellow there. And sap green is just kind of a traditional grass green. But again, you can substitute any color, any brand, it doesn't matter. I'm kind of mixing fluid paint with heavy bodied paint, and that's fine as well. You can use whatever you like. Also, because we're painting, you're going to need water, paper towels, palette to put your paint on, paint brushes in various sizes. If you've painted with me before, you know I don't like to give out specific sizes because that's going to depend on the size of your canvas, as well as the brand of paintbrush you're using. The numbers are not consistent between brands. If you've got a heat gun or a hair dryer and you'd like to speed along the drying process, that's helpful as well. If you need a tracer, one is provided, and you have either a small that will fit an 8x10 or 9x12, or there's one that will work for a 16x20. In order to transfer the tracer, you will need some carbon paper. This is easy enough to find on Amazon, or if you're looking for it in the craft store, it's typically by the craft paintbrushes and things like that. If you don't have carbon paper, you can create your own carbon paper tracer by flipping over your tracer, and you can use a charcoal pencil or just a regular, you know, number 2 pencil. And if you scribble as hard as you can on the back of your tracer, and then you flip it over and then draw, it will transfer as well. This method tends to be a lot lighter than using carbon paper, so if you do choose to use this method, you may want to go over your lines again once you have them transferred. If you have any questions about transferring, or you would need to find another method, I did include transfer options in your email, so you can check that out. And again, before we get started, I like to mention one of the reasons I really like to use YouTube as a method of broadcasting is because you can pause, rewind, fast forward, and all of that as we're live. So if you need to go back a few seconds, or if things are moving too quickly for you, that is an option. So please don't feel pressure. Because I'm working on a smaller size, if you're working on a larger size, it may take you a little more time. That's absolutely fine. Don't stress about that at all. That's what those buttons are for. So with that being said, let's get started. Before we begin, if you want to say hi in the comments, I love to see who's here with me live, so feel free to say hello. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. I will be peeking at those often. We are going to start by creating a wash over the background, and so we're going to mix equal parts raw sienna and white. And so I'm going to put maybe about a quarter size section of both of these colors, raw sienna and white, and mix those together. If you are using a larger canvas, you might want to double that. But it's equal parts raw sienna and white. And we're just creating kind of a nice light yellowy background here. This looks a little light to me, so I'm just going to add a little more. All right. So it's almost a little creamy color. So I mentioned this just needs to be a wash, so if you've got really heavy bodied paint, you may want to thin that down just a smidge. We do still want to see the tracer underneath, but what I'm going to do is just cover the background of this entire design here with this yellow mixture. And I called it yellow. It really is more of a cream. But this is going to help us get rid of all that white from the canvas. So as we layer up, if we do have any part of that background poking through, it'll be this beautiful sandy color and not the stark white of the canvas. Plus, I find it is always nice just to get rid of that blank canvas. It's really kind of intimidating just to get started. So this is a nice way just to get in the flow, get rid of that white, and get moving. So take your time, get your background nice and covered, but make sure you can see your lines. Now the next step we're going to do while this is still wet, and what I'm going to do is take some burnt umber. I'm not going to clean off my brush because we're going to do some blending. And we are going to take the same brush and we're going to blend small amounts of that burnt umber into the cornfield in the back. So we are going to use the vertical strokes and it's going to blend slightly with that base color. And so this is going to be some of the shadowing in the cornfield. Vertical strokes is super important because we want the cornfield to feel like it's got the right flow, the right direction. And I'm not using a ton. I'm going to blend this in a little bit. I'm going to wipe off that brush, and then I am going to come back through and just add just a few more dark strokes here. Remember, at this point we're kind of blending. You don't want to over blend, but it's okay to blend it in. We want it to mix a little bit with that background. And I'm going to wipe that brush off, but I'm going to use it again real soon, so I don't need to clean it off with my water. And then I'm going to come through with a nice thin brush, and I'm just going to add a few more lines with that burnt sienna. And I don't want to blend these in. I want these to be nice and apparent. And don't overthink where you place them. Just a few here and there is fine. All right, so the next step that we're going to do is I've got this mixture left over from step 1, and that was the white and raw sienna. So if you don't have very much of that left, you can mix just a little more. Remember, it was equal parts white with raw sienna, and it just makes a kind of a creamy yellowy color. So I'm going to go back to this, and what I am going to do here is add in 1 part of my sap green. Sorry if you heard that bloop. I like to make sounds sometimes with my paint. If you don't make goofy sounds, are you even really an artist? There we go. So we've got kind of like this light creamy green. And what we're going to do is we are going to start kind of at the line of this cornfield here and work our way down. And as we work down, we are going to add more parts. We're just going to add dashes of the sap green and dashes of the raw sienna. And we're going to kind of mix that in. So I need some sap green and raw sienna. Raw sienna is my lighter brown. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of work this green downward. Don't forget this little section behind your raven here. I can come back and fix the lines around my pumpkin and my raven, so don't worry too much about that. So I'm blending downward. If any of that background is still wet, it's okay if that mixes in. And then the lower I go with it, the more of this sap green I want to be apparent. So I can mix them in here. I can tap in some of this raw sienna. And I want this to be a nice textured background. I don't want it to be you know, real smooth. That's not what we're going for. So as you mix in that sap green down at the bottom, we have almost an ombre effect as it gets darker. I'm not worried too much about these pumpkin lines, but I do want to make sure I go right up to the edge because I don't want a space in between the pumpkin and the background. Don't forget to tap in some of that raw sienna. That kind of unifies the color palette here. This raw sienna really is used throughout the entire piece. I'm just kind of tapping and mushing it. There's no right or wrong way to do this. We just want to get those colors kind of in there and blended. I can bring some of that darkness up. And don't forget, if you have too much dark, just go back to your lighter green and add some of that. If you've got too much light, tap in some of that dark green. You can kind of play with it till you're happy, you know? I like adding just kind of this little bit of brown in there with that raw sienna. I really think it captures kind of the way the grass just kind of browns at the end of the fall and prepares for winter, kind of hibernates a little bit. Alright, now for the next step, I am going to clean off my brush because we are going to move into using some white. We're going to add some color to the sky. Alright, so for the next step, I'm going to need white on my palette and just a tiny bit of cobalt blue. Now this is our sky color, so any kind of light blue or bright blue will work. We're not going to use all that much. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to start with this white and move that out of the way. Right about the top of the cornfield here is where we're going to blend in our sky. So I might have to cut off tops of these corn stalks for now, and that is fine. So kind of visually make your line. We're going to just add in some white. And while this is wet, we're going to blend blue down into that white. But first I need a nice coat of white on there. Alright, so I've got my white outline here. Just going to make sure I've got enough white paint on here. If it's too thin, it'll end up too blue. Okay, so I've got a nice thick coat of white, and what I'm going to do, I don't need to clean my brush. I'm going to tap right into that blue, and I'm going to add blue kind of right around the top edge. Wipe off my brush, and I can tap into some more white. And I am just going to kind of blend this down. So I'm going to start up here first. You want your darkest blue up at the top. Wipe off my brush. Tap back into the white. I'm going to blend down without going too high with that blue. So little by little, I'm pulling this blue down with the clean white paint. Wipe off, and then I'm going to do it again. And once you've got that blue mixed in, if you like a painterly effect where you can see the brush strokes, you can absolutely leave that. If you prefer to have it more blended, you can come back through and blend out that sky. But I like to get the color down first so that it's nice and ombre-ish. Sorry about that dog bark. That's my Eddie. He was laying right next to me, and I guess something startled him. I don't know what, because there is absolutely nothing going on, but it would not be a proper live if one of my dogs did not interrupt. Alright, so we've got that nice sky effect going on there. I'll give everybody a second just to catch up. For the next step, we're going to go back to the corn stalks. For this, we're going to use a nice thin brush. So you can either use a thin round, or if you've got an angle brush that gives you a nice thin line, you can do that as well. And we're going to mix up a corn stalk color. So I'm going to use, let's say, 4 parts white to 1 part of that deep yellow and 1 part raw sienna. So I can just pull up my raw sienna, and I've got some laying around. So 4 parts white, 1 part raw sienna, and 1 part yellow. And when I say parts, I mean this is kind of flexible. So we are going for kind of a brownish yellow cornstalk color. And this, I mean, there's no right or wrong. So kind of just a golden flaxy color here. Oops, don't get green in there. All right, thin that out a little bit. All right, what we're going to do now is go in and we're going to add some individual corn stalks. So I'm going to wipe this off just so I can get a nice thin line to my brush. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix that paint, and we're going to create individual corn stalks. We're going to use loose vertical strokes. So vertical is up and down. And I can still see some of my corn stalks from the background. So I am going to start with those. So if you cannot see your corn stalks, that's okay. We're just adding straight lines on both sides. So on the smaller side, I'm probably going to add 8 of these straight lines here. So on this side, I'm going to add quite a few more since I've got more room. And the key here is just, we're adding a lot of these vertical strokes. And this color is very similar to what we put in that background. And so the eye is not going to be especially drawn to it. All right, once you have, let's see how many I have on this one. I've got 13 on this side, so you can add as many or as few as you want, really. And once we have those strokes in there, what I'm going to do is on the top of some of these, I'm going to add almost like a diamond shape here. So that we are adding this shape at the top. So it might be difficult to see with the yellow, but what I'm doing is I'm adding that fringe at the top of some of these corn stalks. And so some of them are going to go right up into that sky. And I'm adding that fringe and that fuzz up there. I think that is actually where it goes to seed, if I remember correctly. I could totally be making that up. So the key here is to make sure that some of those go over that blue horizon line, right? We don't want everything to be, we don't want to be able to see that line when we're finished. We want it to blend into the corn. So I'm adding some of those. Some might be higher than others. So we're adding the tops to our corn. But also what I want to do with the same color, once I finish adding some tops on there, is I'm going to come across, and let me show you again on here, where I have these stalks, I'm going to just do kind of a swipe and add some leaves to those stalks. And I'm just adding them all over. Don't overthink it, because a lot of this just kind of blends in. So add some at the top, add some at the bottom. It really is just a little bit here, a little bit there, and we're having fun with it. Don't overthink it. Make sure some go off the edge of the canvas. Make sure some go behind the crow. You just want lots of texture and depth and dimension, especially up at that skyline. You raise this up. Now I've got some remaining paint here. What I'm going to do with this flaxy corn yellow is I'm going to divide that into two sections. The first, I'm going to add a touch of that brown umber, or raw, what is it, burnt umber. Your darker brown. So I'm going to create just a little bit darker, and I'm going to add a few more lines and stalks down at the bottom where things get a little more shadowed. And so I'm going to put in some stalks, and then I'm going to put maybe you know, some of those leaves, I don't know what you call it, branches, leaves, the leaves that come off the corn stalks. But I'm only adding this darker shade down here at the bottom. I just want to help add more shadow down there. Again, don't be afraid to get up close to that raven, because we want to make sure that this background follows through all the way. Alright, so I added my darker shade of my corn stalks. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend some white into that yellow, and we're going to create kind of a highlighted yellow, so a nice light corn color. So I added burnt umber and I made a dark one, and now I'm going to add white and I'm going to make a light one. So that's what I did with those two piles of my leftover paint there. And then I am going to come through and maybe add some lighter corn up at the top. So, you know, not as much as I did with the original corn color, but I do want some lighter corn stalks up at the top here, and then add in a few lighter leaves as well. And this just creates variation. So we've got some darker, some lighter, and this makes some of this corn appear farther away and some appear closer. And sometimes less is more, so don't stress about it. Just add some until you feel like it's done. And now just briefly, I'm going to come back to the bottom here of those corn stalks, and I am going to touch in a little bit of this green, sap green, with my darker corn stalk. And then, you know, you can add in a little brown as well. So I had some of that leftover corn stalk color, the dark corn stalk color, and I'm adding in a little bit of green and a little bit of that burnt umber. And I don't need a lot of this. What I'm going to do is kind of dry brush. So I'm going to add it to my brush, wipe my brush off, and I'm just going to kind of, where the grass meets the corn stalk, add in some taps of shadow. And I just want to kind of blur. And this is a dry brush technique, so you do not want a lot of paint on this brush. Very, very, very little. So I just want to kind of blur that horizon line between the corn and the grass. So add a little bit of shadow with that greenish brown that we just made, and then dry brush it so that the corn and the grass are a little blendy. Now from here on out, it's really going to start to come together. So we've got this background layer perfected, right? And now we're going to start moving forward. We're going to start focusing on the raven and the pumpkin. Okay, for the next part here, I am going to grab a round brush. We are going to make some of these lines around the pumpkin. So you don't need a really, really thin liner brush, but you need a small to medium size round. And the colors that we're going to use are sap green, raw umber, and I need a little bit of black. Now I know I'm going to use black for this raven, so I can put a little more than I think I'm going to need. And we're going to add some dark grass around our pumpkin. Sorry, when I lean into my camera, it focuses and does some crazy things. All right. So I need, I'm going to say, I don't know, 2 parts of this green to 1 part of this raw umber. I'm sorry, burnt umber. We're using our dark brown. Sap green, burnt umber, and black is what we're doing here. And so I'm going to mix this sap green and this burnt umber. And it gives me kind of a pine green here. And then what I'm going to do, this is kind of thick, so I'm going to add just a pinch of water. I don't want it really thin, but I do want it thin enough that it moves easily with my brush. All right, so what we're going to do here is we are going to create some green grass coming out around this pumpkin. And so the direction of the strokes go like this, okay? Now at this point, this is probably covered, but you can use this as your reference. And so I am just going to add in, you know, some grassy like strokes around this pumpkin. I'm making sure that I get some down here at the bottom, you know, underneath as well. We want this to be shadowed. And I just kind of flick this out until my brush goes dry. So flick and lift, flick and lift. So it gives you kind of this swoopy, grassy-esque texture. And then I'm going to darken this. So I'm going to dip into my black and then mix it with this remaining green here. And I don't want it to be black, but I want it to darken this green and shadow this green a little bit. And so I'm going to add less strokes of this dark color, but I definitely want to have some shadow. So maybe 2 or 3 on each side with the darkest green. And then 2 or 3 underneath. And then now I'm going to come back through and I'm going to add some strokes right underneath kind of the base of this pumpkin here. I'm going to darken that because that's dark shadow, right? And then grass grows upwards, so I'm going to add a few straight strokes with the dark color going upward. And if you've gone too dark, you can always add, you know, a pinch of light around the edges if you need to go back to that sap green. It's always okay to go back and add more texture. My brush is fairly dry, but I'm just kind of tapping it around just to abstract it a little bit. I don't want this to be, you know, super realistic. But you can add grass details. You know, I'm coming back with a little bit, you know, as I mentioned, a little bit of this light sap green around the top. Wherever you feel like it needs it. We would just want to create a nice resting place for this pumpkin. All right, for the next step, we are going to use straight raw umber. So make sure you have some, I'm sorry, I keep saying raw umber, burnt umber, dark brown, burnt umber. We are going to outline the pumpkin with this burnt umber. And so I'm using straight burnt umber and this same round brush. And I'm going to hold my brush a little higher than normal because I don't want these strokes to be perfect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to outline the pumpkin. So I'm going to start with my curls. The reason why I start at the top is because I don't want to put my hand in it. So if I start at the bottom, you know, I don't want the chance that I'm going to put my hand in it. So I can still see some of these strokes through my pumpkin, through my cornfield. But basically we are just outlining all these twisty parts up here on the stem. And then nice and loose as we come around this pumpkin. We want this pumpkin to be kind of bumpy and misshapen. It's not perfect. And this is a lot easier to do if you have less control over the paintbrush, which is why I'm holding it up top. Alright, so I'm going to wipe off my brush on my paper towel, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up here, and any of this paint that's wet, I'm going to blend it out. Now yours may not be wet, and that is okay, but any parts that are wet I'm going to let just blend out slightly. Alright, now I'm going to take, let's say, 2 parts of this brown umber, burnt umber, and just a pinch of this black. And we're going to darken this burnt umber. So we want a brown black here, but we don't want to overpower the brown. And what we're going to do is at the bottom of each of these twists and turns, I'm going to paint some of this darkest color. And that is our shadowed brown. And then I'm going to come back with the burnt umber straight out of the tube and blend it into that dark. I'm going to add little hints of shadow here on my twisty viney things. with that black brown. And then also here on my pumpkin, on the bottom 2/3, I'm just going to tap in. I don't want to completely go over these lines, but I'm just pulling in some of this shadow color. And the shadow color is the burnt umber and a pinch of black. So it's not straight black. So it just adds a little shadow down here at the bottom. All right, so we are going to let this pumpkin dry for a bit. We're going to start working on this crow. And so we need to mix some blue and black, and we're going to work some of these colors into this crow. Now the very heart of the crow, you don't need to do anything quite yet, but I'm going to just show you. So most of this crow is not actually black. So a very small portion of this is going to be black. This is what we're going to have black kind of right here. You don't need to paint that in yet. I'm just showing you. The rest is going to be a mixture of kind of a dark grayish blue. And so what we're going to do to start, I'm going to choose kind of a medium size brush, medium round. I don't need to go too small. And what I'm going to do, now black is a very strong pigment. So first I'm going to create my gray. So I'm going to mix equal parts black and white. And I get this medium to dark gray here. Then I'm going to tap in 2 parts of that cobalt blue. So I've got a blue gray here. And I might even darken it just a pinch. And my colors here with the camera look pretty true to my eye. So we've got this really deep blue-gray. Can even add in a little more blue. Really, the exact color is up to you, but get a nice deep shade there. And then what I'm going to do is take about half of this, I'm going to pull it to the side, and I'm going to add more black. So this color right here, we've got 2 grays. We've got black, a medium to dark gray, and then kind of a blue-black over here. Most of this crow is going to be blue-black, and so I'm going to put down this blue-black layer as my first layer over my entire friend here. Including his beak. I called him a crow. He is a raven. He has a nice pointed beak there. So most of my crow is this dark gray-black here. And even his little foot, we're doing this color. All right, so once I have this color laid down, this nice, dark, beautiful blue, gray, black darkness, what I'm going to do is wipe off my brush. I'm going to dip into the black, and I'm going to add blackness to this wet paint right in the center and kind of blend it out. Now it's hard to see the subtlety of the difference on camera, but in person this is definitely darker. So I'm just adding straight black to this, the center, basically the whole center of the crow. Now I don't want to cover all of the gray that I put in there, but I do want to have some nice darkness right at kind of the heart of that crow. And crows have feathers, they're textured, so it doesn't have to be, you know, a perfect blend there. I'm going to wipe off my brush. And then I've got this light gray, blue that I mixed first, right? So we had the light, the dark, and then the black. So we did the dark and the black. Now we're going into this lighter color. And I am going to, with the tip of my brush, I want this part to be nice and thin. If you need to go down a size, that's okay too. I'm going to add highlight in small brush strokes around the curve of this crow. Some go off the edge here. And then again over here, I'm going to add some highlight in the feathering. I will lift this up to the camera as well so you can see. It's very subtle at this point. And then a little bit around the crown of his head. So I added this lighter color through here. Here where he's kind of turned, over here on this side, a little bit on his tail, and then up through here. Wipe off my brush. Now I'm going to take more of this cobalt blue and I'm going to mix it into this light color. And then with this mostly cobalt blue, but it's kind of a blue-gray, I'm going to come through and add even lighter highlights, fewer light highlights in those same places. So a little bit on the crown. And less is more. As we're adding highlights, we want these to, you know, be fewer and far between so that it really just kind of accents and makes the black appear blacker, if that makes sense. Now we're going to add a little more detail to the crow in a bit. You know, he's not going to look very crow-like until he gets his eye and some highlight. All right, so the next step we're going to do, we're going to go into this pumpkin, and we are going to create a nice light creamy color. So I need white and burnt umber, and we're going to use about 4 parts white to, I don't know, 1 part burnt umber, and I went a little crazy with my white there. Let's see, let me clean up my brushes. Anytime we're working with white, it's always good to start with a nice clean brush. And for this, I'm probably going to use a medium-sized flat, but a medium round will work as well. All right. So I'm going to pull some white, and so it's about 4 parts white to 1 part burnt umber, but basically we're going to create a light creamy brown. And we are going to use this paint to paint the pumpkin segments, blending small amounts of the burnt umber near the bottom, so wherever we want shadow, and then this lighter color is going to be up at the top. So we're going to work segment by segment, and I'm going to start with my back segments and work forward. So for example, what I'm going to do is just fill in this pumpkin with this mixture I made, this cream mixture. And then tap into my burnt umber, and I'm just going to kind of tap that in at the bottom and blend upward. And this part of the pumpkin is farthest in the back, so it's okay if it's a little darker than the middle segments. Same thing over here. I'm going to fill it in with the cream. And then we are mixing in burnt umber around the bottom. And I'm just going to work my way forward. So doing the next segment here. And then back to this side. All right, now I can add, now that I've got all the dark, what I'm going to do is add just a little bit of white to the remaining mixture, and there's not much remaining, so it's going to mostly be white. And I'm just going to add a pinch of highlight at the top of a few of these. All right, now I'm going to add in just the tiniest pinch of this deep yellow, and I'm going to add it into whatever's remaining here. So my light brown cream mixture there. And then I am just going to kind of touch in some yellow, almost kind of in random places on the shapes here. There's no right or wrong. I'm just adding kind of some yellow, just yellow into the mix, really. It's just, you know, there's no right or wrong. I'm just kind of playing. And you can use your sample photo here if you want to do it similarly to the way that I did, but again, you know, it's totally up to you. I'm going to darken this just a little and go over the highlights that I added here at the bottom, just to mute that slightly. All right, we really are in the home stretch here, guys. We are going to add in some finishing touches. All right, I need the smallest amount of raw sienna. And I'm going to come back through and just touch in a little highlight at the top of these twisties with the raw sienna. Not a lot, just kind of filling it in at the top. You know, we added in the darkness. Now we're just adding in a little highlight to that stem. So basically just at the top of each little twist. And I'm not worried about, you know, I'm just kind of tapping it in. There's no specific place, just little highlights. I'm going to add some little highlights on my stems, my twirly parts of the stem as well. So there's no need to be exacting. We're just touching in a little highlight to that stem. I'm going to go back to my burnt umber, and if I need to, I'm just going to, there's some parts of this that just need to be fixed a little bit after adding in that cream and the yellow. So I'm going to touch that up a little. Again, while I'm working on these pumpkin lines, I'm very loose. It's okay if they're wobbly and wonky. That gives it character. All right, the last place we really need to add some detail is in this crow. We need to make this crow look a lot more crow-like. So around his little feet, I am going to touch in the brown of the stem anywhere that the stem is showing. We just want to make sure that there's brown in there. Now we're not going to add white as a highlight because it's going to be too stark against the black of the crow. And so I'm going to pull out some white. If you have any of your darker blue mixture, you can pull some of that in there and just lighten it up. If not, you can mix white with the tiniest touch of black and the tiniest touch of blue. So what I'm getting here is kind of a, think of like a thunderstormy gray sky. And then I am going to touch in kind of the angle there of the beak. And I'm using a thin round, thin round. And then a little line where the beak meets. I am going to touch in just ever so slightly a few light, thin feathering lines along the curves where I added the highlights before, but just a few. Less is more. This is highlight, so we don't want a lot. Just enough to see the curve of the crow with the feathers. Alright, so for the eye, I'm going to add the tiniest little blue dot there. And then I'm going to come through. If you have your dark mixture, if not, it's black, white, and blue. And we're just going to mix it up till it's nice and dark. And I am going to go kind of down and around the edge of that circle. And I'm going to darken up the bottom side of this highlight just a bit. So it is very subtle. So what I did was I just used the very tip of my paintbrush, sorry about the focusing here, and I added that light glint in the eye, and then I went around it with my darkest blue-black color. Yeah, I'm going to put this down because my camera's having a fit with that focus. But definitely if you need to, use your supply list as a reference. And then I've got highlight on the beak as well. And then from here on out, add any finishing touches that you think it needs. So I'm fairly happy with mine, but if you need to, you know, blend any of this color a little bit, if you need to, you know, lighten anything, you know, your painting is going to be different from mine. Mine is going to be different from my sample. Anytime I paint something, it's always different, guys. So, it's okay just to play, you know, adjust anything you want to. I might add just a little bit of highlight on this crow's toes. So anywhere you feel like you need it. And of course, don't forget to sign your piece. And that is it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I really love this crow. I keep calling him a crow. Crow, raven, bird. I love fall. I love pumpkins. I love cornfields. I love it all. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to paint with me. I can't wait to see what you create. I encourage you, if you have not already, please join my group. It's called the Painted Cicada Art and Share. You can share your work with me in there, share it with everybody. I would love to see it. Or if you just want to share on your social media page, you can always tag me at Painted Cicada, and that will notify me and I'll be able to see it. But I cannot wait to see what you create. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. Good night, everybody.